Well, summer kind of snuck up on me this year. I'm sitting here in the shade. It is 92 degrees. It's supposed to be 94. Probably feel like more like over 100. There's a heat advisory today. And yeah, kind of took me by surprise. I was come back from my trip at the end of May, and I was sick there for a week and a half with COVID, and I kind of come to my senses, and it's full-blown summer in Kansas. It's one of my favorite spots. You see that? My little birdie friends down there. Aye. And there's a little bird bath. I filled that up yesterday. Not exactly level, which is quite bad for a bricklayer. How many times I've leveled that thing up? It's terrible. It keeps moving. That's my little solar power deal for the little ring camera there. Glad I've done that. I haven't had to do anything with the batteries since. And so yeah, it's not bad under the shade here. I think Scottish people might find it oppressive, but you know, it's been 30 years. Still don't like Kansas summers. I get through them, but I tell you, these blue skies that you see are pretty much guaranteed for the whole summer long, and I don't mind that part at all, having grown up in the rain. But yeah, you can hear there's a school back there, and they're adding an addition to it in the summertime, so construction noise. Something that I lived with for a long time. Oh yeah, there's a JCB going about his business. Don't envy those guys. You know, for I think 12 years I worked in the sun here in the summertime in Kansas, and let me tell you, it was not for the faint of heart. And I admire those guys that day after day they go out here months in the summertime and lay bricks and blocks, 100 degrees. It's a special kind of it's a special kind of guy who could do it, and I hated it every single year, man. I detested it, but you know, when in Rome, most Scottish guys don't like to be outdone, so you had to throw yourself in there. And I'd come home drenched like I'd been in a 50-gallon bucket of water. And then you would sit down. Once you sit down, you were done. You know, you got to go in the shower quick, because once you worked 8-10 hours a day in 100-degree weather, lifting sometimes, a lot of times, blocks, heavy blocks. I think the heaviest blocks I ever lifted was a 12-inch split face, 90 to 100 pounds a piece. And you'd be done in, as they say in Scotland, by the end of it. You would drag your behind into the shower, go sit down, and find yourself not being able to move. Hard to move for the rest of the night once you get into that sitting position. So anyway, the Lord delivered me from hard labour. I'm not being funny when I say that, it's how I feel. I've laid bricks for 25 years, and when I was young and strong, I enjoyed the experience of being faster and quicker and stronger than the next guy. But of course you get older and you become slower and weaker, and there's a next guy, young guy, who's stronger than you. So yeah, I don't miss that. I'm glad I experienced it, because it's kind of like growing up in poverty. It gives you an appreciation for things. It's the kind of training that money can't buy. When you've done without in your life, not just for a day or a month, but you know, years, when you didn't have a lot, if you're fortunate. I think if you're in the Lord, you never forget where you came from, or the difficulties that people face when they can't pay a bill. Think about the economy right now and how difficult it is for a lot of people just to put petrol, gas in the car or go to the grocery store, and having to shuffle around and make decisions about what to buy and what not to buy, what bill to pay and what bill not to pay. It's not good. It's not a pleasant place to be in. I don't think politicians of any stripe really care. I think there's some politicians and some stripes care less than others, but in the end, I don't think any of them have any conception of what it is to struggle. There may be a few exceptions amongst these hundreds of congressmen, but I doubt it. I doubt there's very rare. Used to have used to call it it's really a myth of the log cabin president. The guy that was dirt poor and ended up being president, really a myth. If you study the history of it, most of the presidents of America, especially the early presidents, were super, super wealthy guys. I think really Abraham Lincoln was a great example of somebody who was not, or Grant, but not too many. They're mostly wealthy elitists that run everything, which I think is the way it is around the world. Wherever you live, that's who run things, these men and women. And every now and again you'll get somebody who actually cares. It's a really rare occasion. I think the Roosevelts were like that. When I look at Teddy and FDR, Teddy Roosevelt was just he took on the, he broke down the monopolies. Only somebody like him could do that. God bless him. And then his cousin, FDR. I mean, Roosevelt's are a wealthy family, one of the wealthier families in America. And I think he was just going along, FDR, until he was smitten by polio. I don't think a lot of people realize he was 39, I believe, when he was smitten by polio, and it put him into a wheelchair. Very humbling. And he became a different guy after that, and of course Americans grew to love him. He was the president through the Great Depression in the 30s. A lot of the national parks that I love and fortunate enough to be able to go and visit. All these paths and hikes that we do, they were all laid out by men, probably men like myself. If I was around the 30s, I would have been there, I would imagine, getting put to work, doing something that actually means something, and an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. But Roosevelt done that, and it's a legacy. Anyway, he was well loved. He was through the 30s, and of course during the Second World War, almost right up to the end. And he was kind of beloved in America. I'm sure there's Republicans that hated him, but there's always politicians who hate other people. But really, he's what we have. He's what we do not have now. We have no statesman. I'm a student of history, and as I look around the landscape, whether it's Britain, Europe, or America, out of these elitist people who run everything, always have for the most part, I see no statesman. None. All around the world. Now I believe that's a judgment from God. I really believe that. It's a judgment from God, so we are without statesmen. We countries, we nations, or nations under judgment. And I think the only thing scarier than a car careening down a highway at 70 or 90 miles an hour with a drunk driver behind it is a car careening down the highway with no driver behind it, behind the wheel. That's what I feel like in America, that there's nobody behind the wheel. I don't know if the Brits feel that, but that's what it feels like. These elites that run everything have kind of reached a zenith of maybe something like, prior to the French Revolution, where the people in Paris are eating rats and they're out at the palace having lavish parties. Famous phrase, obviously, let them eat cake. Such a detachment from the reality of the people on the ground. I feel I feel for the people that are struggling right now, because I don't believe it's going to get any better. Uh, A, because I think we're under judgment. B, because there is this kind of zenith of elitism that's reaching its height, and something has to give. And as a student of history, when you think about situations that come to a certain point, you think about the American Revolution, you think about the French Revolution, and you think about the Russian Revolution. When the elites get to such a zenith, such a detached ivory tower, where that ivory tower is so high they can't even hear the groans of the people. And even if they could, they would put something into place that would drown out the noise, because that would annoy the way that they're living, And so, I just sense in my spirit there's war coming. Another war like the Second World War, like the First World War. Maybe it'll be China and Taiwan. I think that's a great likelihood, actually. There's a vacuum of power right now. President Biden is probably the most hapless president we've ever had. That's a non-partisan statement, by the way. The most hapless, impotent man. I think of the priesthood, Eli and his sons, and the corruption that was involved in that. I think of President Biden and his son Hunter. So corrupt, so nauseatingly, I don't even know what the word is. He has an affair with his dead brother's widow. That's kind of biblical stuff. And he doesn't get chastised for it from his parents. They just make statements like he's one of the smartest guys in the whole world, which obviously the exact opposite is probably true. So you get blinded people to their own situations, and certainly blind to the rest of us. So, I think out of the vacuum of weakness and haplessness that we see around the world, men like Putin, this is their time. Xi and China, this is their time. There will never be a better time for them to make their moves. I think, as much as people didn't like the orange fella, President Trump, I would hazard a guess that Ukraine would never have happened under Trump, just because he was so unpredictable. And there's a power in unpredictability. There's a real power. If you study history, when you don't know what the other fella's going to do, you think twice about what you're going to do. I think that's a principle that bears out even in the schoolyard, the pub, the prison yard. You have to have an understanding of your opponent. And when you figure a guy out, then that's fine. You've got him figured out. But if you can't figure a guy out, it makes him dangerous. And for all his posturing and his buffoonery, which of course he had all of that, and I personally myself couldn't bear to listen to him in the last couple of years of his presidency. It's very, very nauseating for some guy to tell you over and over again how brilliant they are, how they're the best at everything. I would rush to the TV to turn it off because I couldn't bear to hear it. But having said that, maybe I couldn't bear to be around Patton or somebody like that. Somebody who might have been obnoxious and arrogant. Maybe Churchill would have been hard to deal with on a personal level. Montgomery was certainly hard to deal with. All these guys that were hard to deal with who wouldn't have won any social competitions. But you know what? They got the job done. That's what they did. They got the job done. Some of them despicable men. And so what do we have now? We have hapless politicians pandering to everybody, whatever way the wind blows. Tell you one more thing since I'm rambling. It's a bit of a ramble, but I mean, I'm sure this might offend some people, but when I study the Second World War and I study this mad obsession with Jewish people by Hitler and wanting to kill them all, and even right up until the last days of the war where the Russians are coming in and everything's went to hell in a handbasket, excuse my French, these evil swines were bound and determined to kill every last Jewish person that they could, and they spent an awful lot of resources which would have been a lot better spent fighting the Allies, fighting the Russians. Such was their grand obsession. So I see President Biden on the television Wednesday. Now, we know that chaos is ensuing in this country. Everything's failing, and everybody knows it. And he's talking about transgender rights. Oof. Mad, grand obsessions, even though everything around you is falling to pieces. That's when you know it's an ideology that goes right to the heart of who these folks are. If you're a parent and you are worried about your child or what they're getting taught in school, you're a domestic terrorist. And they will go to lengths. People are being killed in the street and people are being let out of jail and murdering other people, but they will go to lengths to hunt down a parent who's worried about what their kid's being taught in school. It beggars reality. There's a spiritual darkness behind it. I've no doubt about that. This grand obsession with minorities. Absolute grand obsession with minorities. And not your typical minorities that you would think. In this country, your regular minorities would have been the black people, God bless them. The Hispanics, God bless them too. Marvellous people who should get every bit of help they could get. But even they get ignored. The first people to get ignored from the Democratic Party is when I came here. Every union guy I knew was Democrat because he knew what side his bread was buttered. And the Democrats, just for my British friends who don't know, were the keepers of the southern border. And the Republicans were the ones who wanted as many people to come across that border as possible. Why? Because they represented business owners, company owners, corporate owners. They wanted cheap labour. And the Democrats used to represent the union guys, and they were trying to protect the good paying union jobs, which Biden repeats ad nauseum, but it means nothing. But good paying union jobs, they were trying to protect them from cheap labour. And it's just utterly amazing to see the fickle nature of politics and politicians. How you could be so staunchly on one side, and then I think it started with President Obama actually, and he had a grand obsession with all things minority. And when I talk about minorities, I'm talking about 0.5 of the population, those kinds of minorities. Grand obsession. He threw the union guys under the bus, and the Democrats don't have them back, and they're not going to get them back because there would have to be a tremendous change and everything. So that's me. I have rambled. Look, I've rambled on for 20 minutes, and anybody who knows me knows that's a relatively short time. But anyway, some of the random thoughts that run through a Scotsman abroad's mind.